On this vote, the yeas are 237, the nays are 183. The amendment is adopted. On the unfinished business is the request for a recorded vote on Amendment 428, printed in Part B of the House Report 116 through 143 by the gentlewoman from Texas, Ms. Garcia, on which further proceedings were postponed and on which the ayes prevailed by voice vote. The clerk will redesignate the amendment.
Amendment number 428, printed in Part B of House Report number 116-143, offered by Ms. Garcia of Texas.
A recorded vote has been requested. Those in support of the request for a recorded vote will rise and be counted. A sufficient number having risen, a recorded vote is ordered. Members will record their votes by electronic device. This is a 2-minute vote. On this vote, the yeas are 198. The yeas are 200. The nays are 223. The amendment is not adopted. The unfinished business is a request for a recorded vote on Amendment 429, printed in Part B of House Report 116 through 143 by the gentlewoman from New York, Ms. Ocasio-Cortez, on which further proceedings were postponed, on which the ayes prevailed by voice vote. The clerk will redesignate the amendment.
Amendment number 429, printed in Part B of House Report number 116-143, offered by Ms. Ocasio-Cortez of New York.
A recorded vote has been requested. Those in support of the request for a recorded vote will rise and be counted. A sufficient number having risen, the recorded vote is ordered. Members will record their votes by electronic devices. It's a 2-minute vote. On this vote, the yeas are
Ms. Wasserman Schultz. Ms. Wasserman Schultz votes aye.
On this vote, the yeas are 179. The nays are 241, with one person voting present. The amendment is not adopted. The unfinished business is a request for a recorded vote on Amendment 430, printed in Part B of House Report 116 through 143 by the gentlewoman from New York, Ms. Ocasio-Cortez, on which further proceedings were postponed and which the ayes prevailed by the voice vote. The clerk will redesignate the amendment.
Amendment number 430, printed in Part B of House Report number 116-143, offered by Ms. Ocasio-Cortez of New York.
A recorded vote has been requested. Those in support for the request for a recorded vote will rise and be counted. A sufficient number having risen, a recorded vote is ordered. Members will record their vote by electronic devices. This is a 2-minute vote. On this vote, the yeas are 173, the nays are 245. The amendment is not adopted. The unfinished business is a request for a recorded vote on Amendment 437, printed in Part B of the House Report 116 through 143 by the gentleman from Mississippi, Mr. Thompson, on which further proceedings were postponed and on which the ayes prevailed by a voice vote. The clerk will redesignate the amendment.
Amendment number 437, printed in Part B of House Report number 116-143, offered by Mr. Thompson of Mississippi.
A recorded vote has been requested. Those in support of a request for a recorded vote will rise and be counted. A sufficient number having risen, a recorded vote is ordered. Members will record their votes by electronic devices. This is a 2-minute vote. On this vote, the yeas are 213, the nays are 204. The amendment is adopted. The unfinished business is a request for a recorded vote on Amendment 438, printed in Part B of House Report 116 through 143 by the gentleman from New Jersey, Mr. Malinowski, on which further proceedings were postponed and on which the ayes prevailed by voice vote. The clerk will redesignate the amendment.
Amendment number 438, printed in Part B of House Report number 116-143, offered by Mr. Malinowski of New Jersey.
A recorded vote has been requested. Those in support of the recorded vote will rise and be counted. A sufficient number having risen, a recorded vote is ordered. Members will record their votes by electronic devices. This is a 2-minute vote. On this vote, the yeas are 236 and the nays are 182. The amendment is adopted. The unfinished business is a request for a recorded vote on Amendment 441, printed in Part B of House Report 116 through 143 by the gentlewoman from Washington, Ms. Jayapal, on which further proceedings were postponed and which the yeas prevailed by voice vote. The clerk will redesignate the amendment.
Amendment number 441, printed in Part B of House Report number 116-143, offered by Ms. Jayapal of Washington.
A recorded vote has been requested. Those in support of the request for a recorded vote will rise and be counted. A sufficient number having risen, a recorded vote is ordered. Members will record their votes by electronic devices. This is a 2-minute vote.
On this vote, the yeas are 230, the nays are 189, and the amendment is adopted. There being no further amendments, under the rule of the committee rises. The Committee of the Whole House of the State of the Union has under consideration H.R. 2500. Pursuant to the House Resolution 476, I report the bill as amended by the resolution back to the House with sundry further amendments adopted by the Committee of the Whole.
The Chair of the Whole House on the State of the Union reports the committee has had under consideration Bill H.R. 2500 pursuant to House Resolution 476. Reports the bill as amended pursuant to that resolution back to the House with sundry further amendments adopted in the Committee of the Whole. Under the rule, the previous question is ordered. Pursuant to House Resolution 476, the question on adoption of further amendments will be put in gross. The question is on adoption of the amendments. Those in favor, please say aye. Those opposed say no. The ayes have it. Amendments are adopted. The question on engrossment and third reading of the bill. Those in favor, please say aye. Those opposed, please say no. The ayes have it. Third reading.
A bill to authorize appropriations for fiscal year 2020 for military activities of the Department of Defense and for military construction to prescribe military personnel strengths for such fiscal year and for other purposes.
Members, could we please have order in the House? For what purpose does the gentleman from Texas seek recognition?
Madam Speaker, I have a motion to recommit at the desk.
Is the gentleman opposed to the bill?
I am in its present form.
The gentleman qualifies, and the clerk will report the motion.
Mr. Thornberry of Texas moves to recommit the bill, H.R. 2500, to the Committee on Armed Services with instructions to report the same back to the House forthwith with the following amendment. At the end of subtitle A of Title III, add the following new section.
Madam Speaker, I ask unanimous consent that the amendment be considered as read.
Is there objection? Without objection. The amendment is the motion is considered as read. The gentleman is recognized for 5 minutes.
Madam Speaker, this motion is the last opportunity to amend the bill, and it does so, of course, without delaying passage. The bill, as it was considered in committee, authorized $733 billion for defense. Thanks to the work of General Bacon, the committee added $2.3 billion for disaster aid, and then the Rules Committee added widows' tax and Afghan visas and other items that brought the total up to about $737 billion. This amendment takes one more incremental step to fill essential funding gaps in the way that matters most to the troops. It restores $1.6 billion of readiness for things like repairs of F-15s that are only 59% of which are flyable today. It restores money for training, the things that matters most in saving the lives of our men and women. It restores $308 million to the personnel accounts. Now, that's not as much as the Pentagon asked for, but it does take it up to the level that passed the Senate by a vote of 86-8. Finally, it provides a 4% pay raise for the troops. Now, remember, Madam Speaker, the underlying bill does nothing for pay. The formula is as it is, and those members who have claimed the underlying bill did something have gotten 3 Pinocchios over it. Well, this underlying measure does do something. It provides a 4% pay raise to help with recruitment and retention and to send a message to our troops that we value them. Now, that's it. Straight up the middle, 3 things. You either vote for them or you vote against them. Total. It takes the total authorization to just about $740 billion. That's not enough, in my opinion, but it's better. It's better. I yield to the gentleman from Indiana, a veteran of the War of Afghanistan.
Madam Speaker, Madam Speaker, I was proud to serve my country in uniform in Afghanistan. And now I'm proud to serve in this Congress. And I'm proud to serve in a new and different way on what has historically been the most bipartisan committee, the House Armed Services Committee. Truth be told, I had expected that this committee, above all other committees, would always work together in support of our national security. After all, for over 50 years, this committee and this Congress have risen above partisan politics and passed the National Defense Authorization Act. Sadly, today it appears that tradition might come to an end. Madam Speaker, it doesn't have to be that way. This motion is an opportunity for my friends on both sides of the aisle to rise above petty partisan politics and do what the American people sent us here to do, to support our troops and defend our homeland. This year, the NDAA has unfortunately become the Non-Defense Authorization Act, and instead has been hijacked with a partisan political agenda, unlike the last couple of years when we all actually worked together to restore military readiness. At a time when our enemies are challenging us on the world stage, we simply cannot put our troops at risk and jeopardize our national security, which is exactly what the underlying bill would do. Let us show the American people the leadership they deserve. Let us give our troops the raise they've earned. Let us restore readiness and pass a worthy National Defense Authorization Act. Madam Speaker, mark my words. This is the moment of truth for this Congress. This is the single most defining moment of this Congress so far. This motion is an opportunity to show the American people that we can rise above petty partisan politics. Will my colleagues on the other side of the aisle really vote against a well-earned pay raise for our troops or for bolstering our readiness accounts? Madam Speaker, our soldiers, our sailors, our airmen, our Marines, they deserve better. The American people deserve better. With that, I yield back.
Madam Speaker, it's straight up. Pay raise, restore personnel accounts, and improve readiness. Straight up or down, you for it or against it. I yield back.
Has expired. The gentleman from Washington, what purpose do you rise?
To claim time in opposition to the motion to recommit.
The gentleman's recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. We have worked in a bipartisan fashion. And the worst part about it is they all know that, because we spent 6 months, my staff, your staff, working together to produce this product. The only petty partisanship on this bill is coming purely from the Republican Party that will put their partisan desires against voting for it. Why? Because Democrats are in charge. And as we've seen time and again on this floor, no matter how much we work with them, no matter how much we cooperate them, at the end of the day, partisanship trumps all. They will not vote for anything Democrats do, including, by the way, in this bill, we have the largest pay raise for our troops in 10 years. And you all are going to vote against that pay raise in this bill. We have in this bill money for widows. You have co-sponsored this bill for 10 years, telling us how much you care about making sure that the widows of our troops get money. And now that we do it, after 10 years we put it in the bill, you're going to vote against it. Just so you can say Democrats don't support national security. $733 billion in this bill, the largest defense bill in the history of the country. It's not enough. In response to the Democrats, it can always be more. No matter what it is, they're going to say do more. The Pentagon is apparently the only place in the country where Republicans feel that you can throw money at the problem relentlessly. This body has raised pay for our troops every single year. And again, I will simply close by saying we have the largest pay raise in 10 years in this bill for our troops. We've worked in a bipartisan manner. It's easy to say, well, I'm going to vote no, and therefore it's partisan. There's no good reason for it. This should be a bipartisan bill. It supports our troops, it supports our national security, and with that, I yield the balance of my time to the gentlewoman from New Jersey, a Navy veteran who has fought for our country as well, and a member of the Armed Services Committee, Ms. Sherrill.
Thank you.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I rise today to oppose the motion to recommit. As a veteran and as an American, I urge all of you to put the political games aside, put our troops and our country first, and pass this defense bill. For 58 years straight, this Congress has come together across party lines to pass a bipartisan National Defense Authorization Act. This critical piece of legislation ensures Congress has a say in the mission of our military, in the policies of our Department of Defense, and the safety and security of our women and men in the field. Madam Speaker, I am honored to serve on the House Armed Services Committee, and I thank the chairman and the ranking member and all the leaders and all of my colleagues for their dedication to our military and to our national security. And as a U.S. Navy veteran who served for almost 10 years, I'm proud to be part of the new class of veterans and national security professionals who've worked on this bill in the committee. We know what it's like to rely on Congress to execute our mission and to keep our country safe. So we must pass the National Defense Authorization Act in this House. We must make sure that the vitally important priorities included in this House bill make it to the President's desk, and we must show the country that our disagreements are nothing compared to our tradition of crossing party lines and supporting the National Defense Authorization Act. And don't take my word on the importance of this bill. Take it from a Republican and a fellow Naval Academy graduate. He said, how do we explain to Americans who are risking their lives for us that we could not summon the courage to take some hard votes? How do we explain that we could not come together and work together when it mattered most? The fundamental purpose of this legislation, which has united members from both sides of the aisle, is to provide our armed forces what they need to do the jobs we ask of them. Ladies and gentlemen, John McCain knew this must be an area of bipartisan support, and this MTR is an attempt to strip away that bipartisanship, to inject the broken politics of Washington into a bill that should be bigger than your political party. The NDAA fully funds a 3.1% pay raise for U.S. military personnel, exactly what the President asked for. Madam Speaker, this is the largest pay increase since 2010, the last time the Democrats were in power. My colleagues had almost 10 years and more recently 21 hours of markup and 28 hearings to discuss this very issue. But not one of my colleagues on the other side of the aisle brought this issue up in committee. This last-second partisan motion undercuts the hard work of the House Armed Services Committee,
The gentlewoman's
which passed the largest pay raise for our
The gentlewoman's time has
troops in
expired.
years.
Yeah, that's it. Without objection, the previous question is ordered on the motion to recommit. The question is on the motion to recommit. Those in favor, please say aye. Those opposed, please say no. The noes have it. The motion is not adopted.
Madam Speaker,
The gentleman from Texas.
I ask for a recorded vote or yeas and nays, whichever is appropriate.
A recorded vote is requested. Those favoring a recorded vote will rise. Efficient number having risen, a recorded vote is ordered. Members will record their vote by electronic device. Pursuant to Clause 9 of Rule 20, a 5-minute vote on the motion to recommit will be followed by a 5-minute vote on passage of H.R. 2500 if ordered, and the motion to suspend the rules and pass H.R. 1327. This is a 5-minute vote. On this vote, the yeas are 204. The nays are 212. The motion is not adopted. The question is on passage of the bill. Those in favor, please say aye. Those opposed, please say no. The ayes have it.
Madam
The gentleman
Speaker,
from Texas.
Madam Speaker, I ask for a recorded vote.
A recorded vote is requested. Those in favor of a recorded vote will rise. A sufficient number having risen, a recorded vote is ordered. Members will record their votes by electronic device. This is a 5-minute vote. On this vote, the yeas are 220, the nays are 197. The bill is passed. Without objection, the motion to reconsider is laid on the table. Pursuant to Clause 8 of Rule 20, the unfinished business is a vote on the motion of the gentleman from New York, Mr. Nadler, to suspend the rules and to pass H.R. 1327 as amended, on which the yeas and nays are ordered. The clerk will report the title.
H.R. 1327, a bill to extend authorization for the September 11th Victim Compensation Fund of 2001 through fiscal year 2090 and for other purposes.
The question is, will the House suspend the rules and pass the bill as amended? Members will record their vote by electronic device. This is a 5-minute vote.
On this vote, the yeas are 402, the nays are 12. Two-thirds being in the affirmative, the rules are suspended. The bill is passed, and without objection, the motion to reconsider is laid on the table. Without objection, the title is amended. Without objection, the title of H.R. 2500 is amended. For what purpose does the gentleman from Washington ask for recognition?
Mr. Speaker, I ask unanimous consent that the clerk be authorized to make technical corrections in the engrossment of H.R. 2500, including corrections in spelling, punctuation, section and title numbering, cross-referencing, conforming amendments to the table of contents and short titles, the insertion of appropriate headings, and to provide instructions that Amendment Number 234, printed in Part B of House Report 116-143, be inserted at the end of Subtitle G of Title 28, and that the instruction in Amendment Number 64, printed in Part B of House Report 116-143, be changed from page 387 after line 7 to page 387 after line 15. And I hope you understood that, because I certainly did not.
Without objection,
yes.
Without objection, so ordered.
All yours, sir.
For what purpose does the gentleman from Pennsylvania seek recognition?
Mr. Speaker, I ask unanimous consent that the Committee on Judiciary be discharged from further consideration of H.R. 962, the Born Alive Abortion Survivors Protection Act, and ask for its immediate consideration in the House.
Under guidelines consistently issued by successive speakers, as recorded in Section 956 of the House Rules and Manual, the Chair is constrained not to entertain the request unless it has been cleared by the bipartisan floor and committee leaderships. The gentleman is not recognized for debate. For what purpose does the gentleman from Louisiana seek recognition?
Mr. Speaker, I ask unanimous consent to speak out of order for the purpose of inquiring to the Majority Leader the schedule for next week.
Without objection, so ordered.
And, Mr. Speaker, I also ask unanimous consent to revise and extend my remarks.
Without objection, so ordered.
Now, Mr. Speaker, I would like to yield to my friend, the gentleman from Maryland, the distinguished Majority Leader of the House.
The gentleman from Maryland is recognized.
I thank my friend for yielding. Mr. Speaker, I would like to, before I get into the schedule, I know that all of our thoughts are with my good friends in Louisiana and my good friend who represents Louisiana. His constituents and the people of Louisiana as they brace for Tropical Storm Barry, expected to make landfall tomorrow. This is a serious storm, and when combined with the flooding we've already seen along the Mississippi, it poses a serious threat to the safety and welfare to many. We hope everyone is safe and taking the necessary steps to get out of harm's way, and I want the gentleman from Louisiana to know how much we are paying attention to his constituents and the state he represents and the region he represents, and I'll yield to my friend.
I thank the gentleman for yielding, and I truly appreciate the concern and support and prayers that have been offered, and obviously we're all praying for the people of South Louisiana as Tropical Storm Barry approaches. In the next 24 hours, we expect landfall. We're surely expecting heavy rain, hopefully, I know as I've talked to local officials, from the governor to the mayor of New Orleans and other elected officials on the ground, they are prepared. They've asked for different things, including the governor had asked for an emergency declaration. I spoke to President Trump yesterday, and he did, in fact, issue that emergency declaration. And so all of the federal agencies, from FEMA to the Corps of Engineers to other federal agencies, are working well with state and local officials to make sure they have the tools they need. Our first priority, of course, is the safety of the people of South Louisiana, and as they protect their homes and protect their property, we just encourage them to listen to their local officials, and if evacuation orders are issued, we ask those folks to heed those warnings, because it's a serious storm, and it's a storm that we are preparing for. But as they say, you prepare for the worst but hope for the best, and we're doing all of that, and I appreciate the gentleman's concerns, and with that, I'd yield back.
Well, I thank the gentleman. I know he's concerned. We share that concern, and we share the concern for the people of South Louisiana. On Monday, Mr. Speaker, the House will meet at 12 p.m. for morning hour debate, 2 p.m. for legislative business, with votes postponed until 6:30 p.m. On Tuesday and Wednesday, the House will meet at 10 a.m. for morning hour debate and 12 p.m. for legislative business. On Thursday, the House will meet at 9 a.m. for legislative business. Last votes of the week are expected no later than 3 p.m. on that Thursday. Mr. Speaker, we will consider several bills under suspension of the rules, including H.R. 748, Middle Class Health Benefits Tax Repeal Act of 2019. The complete list of suspension bills will be announced by the close of business today. The House will consider H.R. 3494, the Intelligence Authorization Act. I'm pleased to say that the bill was approved by a unanimous voice vote in committee and would authorize funding and enable congressional oversight of the U.S. intelligence community. Mr. Speaker, the House will also consider a resolution to hold Attorney General Barr and Secretary Ross in contempt over efforts to ignore congressional subpoenas and subvert the 2020 census, with the addition of a citizenship question meant only to deter minorities from participating and leading to an undercount in parts of the country. In addition, the House will also consider S.J. Res. 36, S.J. Resolution 37, and S.J. Resolution 38. Last month, Mr. Speaker, the Senate passed 22 resolutions of disapproval related to the Saudi UAE arms sale, for which the administration declared an emergency, thereby bypassing the Congress of the United States. The House will take up three of these resolutions related to precision-guided munitions, the most controversial and significant sales contemplated. Lastly, the House will consider H.R. 582, Raise the Wage Act. This legislation, authored by Chairman Scott, would gradually increase the minimum wage to $15 by 2024. This bill is an important step towards lifting millions of American workers out of poverty. We believe that one should not be working a 40-hour week and still remain under the poverty level in our country. We raised the minimum wage for the first time in nearly a decade, essentially 10 years. And I yield to my friend.
I thank the gentleman for yielding, and as we look at the calendar next week, and specifically the bill dealing with the minimum wage, I would ask the gentleman if he's looked at some of the studies that have been done, as well as some of the other actions that, even if you look at the city of Baltimore, they had proposed and actually passed a $15 minimum wage, and the Democrat mayor of Baltimore vetoed that, specifically citing the job losses that would come with that kind of change. The CBO report that just came out a few days ago, as the majority leader knows, cited that you could have up to 3.7 million jobs lost in America if that bill were to pass. So we've got a growing economy, Mr. Speaker, a robust growing economy. We are the envy of the world right now in our economy, and people at every income level are receiving the benefits of that in terms of higher wages, more jobs. In fact, more job openings today than there are Americans looking for work. This is the kind of opportunity we want for all people. And in fact, as we're seeing, people at even the lower income entry-level job levels are the ones benefiting the most from the tax cuts in the growing economy we have as a result of it. And so why, I would ask, would we want to reverse course and actually pass legislation that not only studies estimate would devastate low-income people, literally the entire state of Oklahoma, 3.7 million people, eviscerated job losses. That many job losses, Mr. Speaker, would come from this bill passing. And you don't just need to look at estimates. You can actually look at what happened in the city of Seattle. In 2014, Mr. Speaker, the city of Seattle instituted a similar $15 minimum wage. And so now we have a few years of actual data to look at what happened in a city like Seattle. And so the University of Washington, Mr. Speaker, did a detailed study of that minimum wage increase. What they found were similarly devastating numbers for low-income workers, the same people that would be hurt by the bill that the majority is going to be bringing up next week. And in fact, what the University of Washington study found was that you had roughly 3 million hours, work hours, lost, 5,000 jobs lost. They, in fact, found that the cost to low-wage workers in Seattle outweighed the benefits by a margin of 3 to 1, devastating low-income workers the most. And so if you look at not what might happen if we do this at the federal level, where the estimates are we'd lose 3.7 million jobs in America, mostly hurting lower income, those entry-level jobs, those jobs where we want people to be able to get started to become part of the middle class, to become part of the American dream. And taking that away from them, go look at what they did in Seattle when they actually did this. Not when they talked about it, but when they did it, 3 years of data, and the study showed it was devastating to low-income people. And so I would hope that the gentleman's looked at some of this and has looked at the concerns that we've expressed along the way and the recent CBO score that's underlined how bad and devastating this would be to low-income workers. And I would yield to the gentleman.
I thank the gentleman for his observations, and he, I think, told a partial story of the CBO study and some other studies. Of course, he mentioned the city of Baltimore. The problem with the city of Baltimore, as the mayor indicated, who vetoed it, was that next door, the minimum wage was lower. Had the minimum wage been the same, there would not have been the same transfer, I suggest to the gentleman. But that aside, he mentions the CBO report on the impact of gradually raising the minimum wage to $15 an hour. The minimum wage was last raised in 2007, and it then incrementally raised over 3 years to the present $7.25. It has not been raised in a decade. The poorest workers in America have not had a raise in 10 years. We don't think that's right, as we see this extraordinary disparity of income, where presidents of corporations now are making 1,500 times what their lowest average worker makes. Very frankly, we are a consumer-based economy. 70% of our GDP is based upon consumers. And if we raise their salaries, they're going to spend more and grow the economy, and I suggest grow jobs, not shrink jobs. Now, let's look at the CBO study. The CBO study had a number of different averages that were perceived, 3 of which were zero loss of jobs. 3.7 was the maximum, not the average, the maximum loss. Now, I'm not surprised that opponents of raising the minimum wage would point to that figure as if it were the figure. It is a maximum, the worst case scenario. Now, we have a growing economy. I don't expect the worst case scenario to occur. The fact of the matter is that we believe that this bill and this raise will have little, if any, adverse impact. But we do know is this, which the gentleman did not mention. CBO said the bill would give 27 million workers in America a raise. And that the worst case scenario, And we don't want to see anybody lose their job, would be 3.7, but the average would be less than 2 million. That was their average estimate, and 3 of them were zero. So we believe that 27 million Americans, which will lift 1.3 million Americans out of poverty, is something that will be good for America. Will be good not only for those workers, but will be good for business, will be good for their families, will be good for children, and will be good, frankly, for all of us. So the benefits of the Raise the Wage Act for America's workers, in our opinion, far outweigh any potential risk. We think the risk is minimal. But after more than 10 years with no increase in the federal minimum wage, which I might point out, Mr. Speaker, is the longest period since the adoption of the minimum wage in 1938, the longest period we have gone without raising the minimum wage. I might say, Mr. Speaker, it's been 10 years since we Democrats were in the majority. I just point that out because the last time we were in a majority, we passed, and very frankly, President Bush signed, and the raise that got us to $7.25 an hour. But this is the longest time in history it hasn't been raised. The Raise the Wage Act is a critical step, in our view, toward restoring the value of work and ensuring that working families, we all say we're for working families, well, we ought to pay them, and we ought to pay them a decent wage. And by the way, this raise is probably a very, very infinitesimal percentage of the raises that those at the upper level in the top 10%, top 5% have received. This will allow working families to achieve some type of financial security. We believe that is essential, and we're very pleased that this bill is moving forward, and we urge all of our members to support it. And I yield back to my friend.
Well, thank you for yielding back. And I'd first like to point out it is not we who are paying those wages. It are small businesses, small and medium-sized businesses who are paying those wages to workers, and what we've seen from the current economy, from cutting taxes, not from the government coming in and saying we're going to have some $15 minimum wage that has been proven in other places to eviscerate jobs, to kill jobs, and hurt lower-income people. With our current economy, because of cutting taxes, lower-income people are benefiting the most. They're seeing wages go up. They're actually seeing wages go up, and the data shows that. And that's why you're seeing such strong economic numbers right now, because the tax cuts are benefiting people at every income level, but especially at the lower income levels. And so when you talk about the jobs that would be lost, if we split it in the middle, if we go with the median of the study, that's 1.3 million jobs lost. Don't take your number, don't take my number, take the median number in the CBO study. 1.3 million jobs, that's the entire state of Maine losing their jobs. Losing their jobs. And what we've also seen is small businesses, as minimum wages go to a higher level, look at automating jobs, which means those jobs go away. So it's the lower income workers, the first job for many people, their first entry into opportunity where they can then become a homeowner, then become part of the American dream. Those are hit the hardest. And in fact, the study shows that this bill would reduce family income by $9 billion. So I know we can look at it from different sides, but again, if you just took the median, split the difference between your numbers and mine, you end up with 1.3 million jobs lost and devastation for a lot of people at the lower incomes. And the Seattle study shows, not theory, but what really did happen in a city like Seattle where they did this. And by a 3-to-1 margin, low-income people were hit the hardest and hit very hard in a negative way. But I'd yield back to the gentleman.
I think the gentleman has the time, and I thank him for yielding. I would simply say that he said the entire state of Maine. Maybe you missed the fact that I said 27 million people under this bill are going to get an increase in their salary and in their ability to support themselves and their family. That, by the way, is about the size, perhaps, of New York. I'm not sure. It's not quite California, which is 38 or 39 million people, but 27 million are going to get a raise. And my suggestion is, and I believe this sincerely, that increase in raise, because your consumers, those consumers all spend their spendable money. They need it to support themselves, and that's going to be an infusion. And when the gentleman says small business, I understand that, but we all pay it in the end, because the consumer of services and goods is who will pay it. And we understand that, but not paying it perhaps advantages us, because some family can't support themselves and very frankly are maybe on public assistance, so we pay for it one way or the other. This is the right thing to do. 27 million Americans, that's about a sixth, I think, of our workforce, somewhere in that neighborhood, is going to get a raise under this bill. Now, I hope that the estimate is wrong of 1.3 million. I think it is wrong, as I explained. If everybody is doing the same, then the employer who needs to do things, have things done, is going to get those things done, and he will be on, or she will be on a competitive level, because others will be doing the same thing in terms of the level of pay. They won't be competing with people who are paying their folks at a very low level, and people will be able to survive. So I understand the gentleman's position. This argument has been made, by the way, I would say the gentleman's argument has been made since 1938. Every time the minimum wage came up for increase, we've heard this. I didn't hear it in 38. I want to make that very clear. But that argument has been made every time the minimum wage that I've been involved in this floor over the last 30 years has been made. And I suggest to you, as a result of the raising of the minimum wage, our economy has been better. It's grown more. People have been better off, and we've had a better country. I yield to my friend.
Thank you again for yielding. And when we talk about the 27 million, let's keep in mind that as you look at what they studied on the impacts, it's the lower income workers, as the wages might even go up. And by the way, wages are already going up today. Without this bill, wages, real wages, are going up, and especially benefiting the lower income, the entry-level jobs. What President Trump wanted to do to rebuild our middle class, that was evaporating. It literally was going away. We were losing our middle class to foreign countries because we were not competitive as a nation. And now we are competitive, not only competitive, but the envy of the world, the economic leader of the world. Again, why would we want to bring a bill that would devastate? And to those 27 million people, if you look again at the Seattle study, what they showed was that the cost to low-wage workers in Seattle outweighed the benefits by a ratio to 3 to 1. So even for those people that were getting a higher wage, because other costs went up and their hours went down, the amount of time they were able to work was reduced. It actually had a devastating impact to those low-income workers. So on one end, it might sound really good. Hey, you're going to get a higher wage, but oh, by the way, we're not going to be able to give you as many hours to work. And you saw that over and over again in the study. It showed millions of hours lost. So somebody that's working 2 jobs, struggling to get by because they want to become part of the middle class. Today, they're actually seeing a wage increase. If that was evaporated because of this, even for the people that would see a higher wage, the cost to them would be more devastating by a 3 to 1 margin if you go by what actually did happen in Seattle when they did it. And so that's why I just say that study would be important to look at, because it doesn't show just in theory, which the CBO has a lot of good underlying data to back up with, but then Seattle is where it really did happen, and it was devastating to lower-income workers. If the gentleman had anything else on this, I'd yield back. I did want to bring up another issue, though, but I would yield.
I think we've exhausted that subject. I think the positions have not changed since 1938, and I don't expect them to change in the next few minutes.
Well, thank the gentleman for yielding. Maybe as next week this debate continues, we'll see if I can be more persuasive with my friend, but likely not. But at least we ought to have that debate and at least get these sides out and aired. Now I do want to talk about something where I do think we have agreement, but maybe a lack of understanding of a timeline, and that is the United States MCA Mexico-Canada trade agreement. And we've had many meetings. I know we were in a meeting together with the Prime Minister Trudeau of Canada. We know our friends in Mexico want this. Our friends in Canada really want this. We want this too. With only 8 legislative days left before the August recess, could the gentleman give an indication of if there is the ability to include USMCA on the calendar in these next 2 weeks that we have available? And I would yield.
Gentlemen, I thank the gentleman for yielding. We did have a meeting, and on a bipartisan fashion, I think we're all hopeful that we can pass the USMCA. I was here when we passed NAFTA, as was the Speaker. There were a number of promises made, as the gentleman knows from his knowing the experience of NAFTA. A number of promises were made that weren't kept, so that we are very focused, as the gentleman knows, on workers' rights, environmental protections, the price of biologics and the length of time that they would be protected from generic competition and bringing prices down. But we are, as we discussed in the meeting to which the gentleman referred, where we met with the Prime Minister of Canada, Mr. Trudeau, and many of his cabinet, we are very concerned about enforcement. We want to say, if we make this agreement, that it will in fact be enforced. And as you know, there were meetings as late as yesterday on this issue. The good news is, as the gentleman probably knows, Ambassador Lighthizer has great respect and confidence on either side both sides of the aisle. I would say that he is one of those people who both sides of the aisle believe is credible, knowledgeable, straightforward, and an honest broker. So we're working very hard with him. Almost every Democrat has said we're trying to get to yes on this. I don't think you've heard many Democrats, if any, say we're not for this agreement. So I'm hopeful that we can get there, personally. I think this is an improvement over the existing NAFTA. I would say, however, that I think it would be a mistake if, in fact, we don't get to an agreement, which I hope we will, to back out of NAFTA, as the President has indicated. I think that would cause chaos in our economy and with respect to Canada and Mexico as well. So I think that would not be a good policy, but I think a good policy would be if we can get enforcement and the assurances that the agreements that are made will in fact be carried out by all parties, then hopefully we can get this done. Whether we can get this done by the July break, by the August break, I can't make that representation to the gentleman, which does not surprise him, I'm sure. But I can tell you, yesterday, as you know, there was work being done on it, and I trust that there'll be work being done on it in the coming days. And if we can get to an agreement, we will move it as quickly as possible. But we may need to make sure that the protections that are referenced in the document will in fact be the protections that are affected and enforceable. I thank the gentleman.
Thank the gentleman, and I share the same sentiment that Ambassador Lighthizer has done a great job of working with members on both sides to address questions, concerns, find ways to make sure that those concerns are addressed, whether they're already inside the agreement or if there are other things that can be done to double, underscore, and highlight those concerns. But in the meantime, hopefully we can move beyond trying to get to yes and actually have a bill where we can whip that and get to yes. I know we have a whip team that I've put together on our side that's ready to go, and hopefully your side will be able to get there. It'd be ideal if we can do that before we recess. Clearly, that's not the only way to get this done, but we do have to respect as well that the other countries, our friends Mexico and Canada, have an interest in this as well. Canada has elections coming up. We don't want to have this jeopardized and become something that gets pushed behind their national elections. Ideally, we can get it done well in advance of their elections and respect the fact that they would like this done as well, and the goodwill that's been created between our three countries. So I'm hopeful that we can get through these final issues, get a bill that we can bring to the floor, work together to pass, and then see the benefits in our economy, see an improved NAFTA, a bill that's better for American workers and opening up more access to markets in Canada and Mexico that right now are closed. So I thank the gentleman for the encouragement, and I remain hopeful as well and would continue to encourage that we get this done as quickly as possible. Finally, on the NDAA bill that we just finished, we had, of course, a disagreement on a number of fronts in terms of the priorities of our military, but I would want to bring up one point, and that was the piece of legislation, the Military Surviving Spouses Equity Act by our colleague Joe Wilson. The majority, when y'all took the majority, you created a new mechanism for members to bring bills to the floor called the consent calendar. This was the first bill that actually met that criteria. In fact, far exceeded the 290 signatures. He had 365 co-sponsors, incredibly bipartisan, to address a real serious problem for spouses of men and women in uniform who died fighting for our country, to make sure that an inequity is corrected that we both agree needs to be fixed. Here is a bill that can quickly get to the president's desk. And maybe it gets included in other pieces of legislation that might come months away. But here is a bill where a member worked in good faith under the rules that were created. And it was unfortunate that the rule to bring the NDAA bill to the floor turned off the consent calendar specifically for that bill, that one bill, which happened to be the first bill that met that requirement. I would just ask if the gentleman could maybe look again at bringing that bill to the floor as a standalone bill in respect of the hard bipartisan work that Congressman Wilson made to address a serious problem for spouses, widows of our men and women who die in uniform. And I would yield.
I thank the gentleman for his comment. Joe Wilson, of course, a member of his party. Joe Wilson filed that bill 5 Congresses ago, 8 years ago, and it languished. It was not brought to the floor, did not pass, and I understand the gentleman's concern, but he ought to also reflect upon that fact that Joe Wilson introduced it 4 Congresses ago, so that we have now included it in the bill. We think it was a proper provision to have in our bill. Of course, all your people voted against that bill, and I would observe they voted against a bill that, frankly, the chairman of your committee, now the ranking member, wrote an op-ed in the Wall Street Journal that said the appropriate level of funding was exactly what we put in our bill. The Joint Chiefs of Staff said that the figure for 2020 was 733. I was deeply regretful that a bill which was the figure that Mr. Thornberry put forward in an editorial in the Wall Street Journal, and I might say I'd had conversations with him subsequent with that recently, which confirmed to me that he still held that view. Notwithstanding that, every one of your Republicans voted against that, I think. Am I correct on that?
Everyone, yes.
Everyone voted against it. And it was the largest. There was this complaint about the size of the military pay raise. It was the largest raise for our military in 10 years. Now, we were in charge 10 years ago, and we're now back in charge, which means we've had the 2 largest raises, and that was included in your MTR. Mr. Chairman, Mr. Speaker, I would hope the whip would, as we do so often, work in a bipartisan fashion on these issues. The committee did work in a bipartisan fashion. I am very disappointed that this was made a political issue. Mr. Speaker, it was made a political issue on the theory that maybe the Democrats can't pass this bill. And if we all vote against it, we'll say, look, the Democrats don't support defense. Mr. Speaker, we did pass that bill. We passed it with over 218 votes, 220 to be exact. And it included some very, very important things for our men and women in uniform, for weapon systems, for operations, for training, to strengthen our national security. And it was turned into, in my opinion, Mr. Speaker, a partisan issue. And that is sad and unfortunate because at least on the national security, for which I have been supportive for 38 years. I supported much of the Reagan buildup. I supported the deployment of missiles in Europe. I supported the MX missile, which was somewhat controversial in my district. I did it because I thought America needed to be strong and to make sure the world knew we were going to be strong. And when you talk about Joe Wilson's amendment, which we included in our bill, which you were supportive of, and I think the level of funding was also, frankly, intellectually supported, if not politically supported. I regret that we did not have a bipartisan vote on the defense bill. With respect to your specific question, I respond to the whip, Mr. Speaker. We hope this bill is signed. If not, we hope it goes to conference. We hope we have a conference agreement, Mr. Speaker, and we hope that the Wilson Amendment is kept in the conference report. And I yield to my friend.
I thank the gentleman for yielding, and let's be crystal clear about what happened. The Armed Services Committee, the chairman of the Armed Services Committee, made this a political bill by putting poison pills in the bill that undermine our national security. That's not a partisan issue. And so if you go back to the funding levels, it's
Will
not
the
just about
gentleman
funding levels.
specify what those were?
I'll absolutely be happy to specify what those are, but first of all, let's talk about funding levels. It's not just about funding levels. If you have a funding level and then you put policy underneath it that limit our men and women in uniform's ability to train safely and to do their job safely and effectively, that is a poison pill approach. It's a partisan approach. It should have never happened. Mr. Speaker, it's been 58 years where Republicans and Democrats have worked alike together to pass a National Defense Authorization Act, not making it political specifically in committee. And there's no member of our Congress that works better with people on both sides of the aisle to support our men and women in uniform than Mac Thornberry. And Mac worked overtime to try to heal this divide, to make sure that a bill could come out of committee that was bipartisan, reflecting those 58 years. And in fact, the Senate did this. And I think the gentleman from Maryland knows this well. The Senate did not make it political. The Senate passed a bill with an 86-8 vote, with all the leadership of the Republican side and Democrat side voting together, and that was the approach we wanted to take, Mr. Speaker. And if there was a better way, we should have done it together. But your side went against even what Senate Democrats did and chose an approach that, for example, undermined our nuclear missile defense, that, for example, went against the AUMF agreements that would have made it harder, if your bill were to become law, would have made it harder for us to counter terrorism activities in the Middle East. Why would we want to do that in legislation and hamstring our men and women in uniform? In fact, the bill that you just passed would undermine the gains we've made in making our men and women in uniform be able to train more safely. Before we came up with the 2-year budget agreement that we got together, Republicans and Democrats, when we were in the majority, we were seeing our men and women in uniform die in training missions more than they were dying in combat. And it was by a 5-to-1 margin, men and women in uniform were dying in training missions. Planes falling out of the sky because they didn't have enough to spare parts. And so we finally started to address that, and this bill undermines that, making our men and women in uniform less safe. That's not the approach we should be taking. If you want to call that bipartisan, then go look at the fact that no Republicans voted for that bill, and 8 Democrats voted against it, because it was a partisan approach. It was a bill that undermines our national security. The Senate didn't do that. The Senate came together the right kind of way. It's the way we should have done it here. And if you want to talk about the pay raise, let's be very clear and upfront about it. If we didn't even have this bill, our men and women in uniform get that pay raise. It's current law. It's like you putting a provision in your bill saying the sun's going to come up tomorrow, and then if it does, you take credit for it. The pay raise was already going to happen. And so you put it in the bill and say you gave the pay raise? It was already there. It was already what we got into law when we were in the majority working with you. We didn't just say it was our way or the highway. That NDAA bill, every year we were in the majority, was a bill that was worked on with Republicans and Democrats, and they didn't send it out of committee until they had complete agreement. And that was an area where we didn't have political differences. We ought to, at a minimum, we're going to have political differences on minimum wage and some of these other issues, but we shouldn't have our men and women in uniform become part of the political divide in Washington. The Senate didn't do it. Our members didn't do it and tried to work together. And if the chairman wanted to go his own way, That's not the approach we should be taking. It's not the approach we've taken for 58 years, and it's not the approach that Senate Democrats took when they worked with Republicans to come up with a bill that put our men and women in uniform in priority. And so you can look at the bill and you can talk about what's in it. I'll tell you what's already current law anyway, but I'll also tell you what the Senate did to make sure that they didn't have those poison pill provisions. They shouldn't have been in the bill. And ultimately, they're not going to be in anything that becomes law. You know it, and I know it. And so it shouldn't have happened what happened today, but maybe it's a lesson that when we get beyond this and we see what the final product's going to be, it will be a bill where we come together. And we ultimately will come together to make sure our men and women in uniform have the tools that they need to train safely and defend our nation safely. But the bill that came out of the House today did not achieve that, and it fell very short of where this House should have been in representing our men and women in uniform. And I would yield back.
Obviously, we could debate a bill we just passed, a bill that's been debated on this floor for 3 days, a bill that was chairmaned and supported by somebody equally, if not more, bipartisan in terms of his work over the years on this matter of defense, Adam Smith, period. It is a good bill, Mr. Speaker. It takes care of the men and women. It provides for the necessary resources. And yes, it says we ought to have a new AUMF. It is now 18 years old. Now, with respect to the pay raise that was going to happen anyway, I presume the gentleman refers to the recommendation of the President of the United States, a Republican. We took the recommendations of the President of the United States and put it in our bill. And it is higher than any figure that was put in for our men and women in uniform during the previous 10 years that the Republicans controlled the House and controlled this bill. There were poison pills, from my perspective, in the defense bills in years past. And I now note that I voted against those bills when they passed the House. I voted for the conference committee when it came back. I'm hopeful that the Republicans will decide that the rhetoric they used, if you vote against this bill, meaning the defense bill, to our side, you vote against the men and women in the armed forces, the men and women in uniform, the men and women at the point of the spear. I hope you'll remember that language, Mr. Speaker, and I hope my Republican colleagues will remember that language. Now, apparently, it doesn't apply. This was a good bill. This was a bill worked on in a bipartisan fashion. And I will tell the whip, Mr. Speaker, that I had conversations with some of the top Republican leaders on that committee with respect to funding levels. And I was told that the funding levels that were in our bill, as the Joint Chiefs said, and as the ranking member said in an editorial in the Wall Street Journal, were appropriate levels that will fund the priorities of our country and the needs of our national security, Mr. Speaker. And I hope certainly that the Senate and the House can work on this. And by the way, the Senate number is the same as our number as it relates to compensation, I believe, for the members of the armed forces. So I would hope, Mr. Speaker, when this bill comes back from conference, that we will have agreement, we will pass it, and we will send it to the President for signature. That's the way it ought to be. And I'm sorry that we didn't get significant support, as is almost always the case, except when political games were played. Not that just items were put in that the Republicans didn't like, or the Democrats didn't like, because there were a lot of things in the defense bills that I voted for that I didn't like, but I thought the overall bill was a bill that supported our troops and supported our national security, as I think this bill did. So we will see. And I yield to my friend.
And as we continue this debate, as the bill moves through the process, and you look at where the Senate started with a very large vote, 86-8, Republicans and Democrats working together and coming together. We can agree on funding levels. But if the underlying policy undermines the actual money that's being spent, undermines the mission, the ability for our men and women to train safely and defend our country safely, then the funding levels are not being spent properly. It's about not just the money, but how the money's being spent, the policies behind it that allow our men and women to train safely, to defend our country safely. That's at issue. We'll continue debating that. I would predict in the end, a final product that goes to the President's desk is going to look a lot more like the Senate bill than the bill that came out of the House, and hopefully addresses all of those problems that were identified earlier. But we'll continue that debate as well. I'd yield back to the gentleman if he had anything else, but I'm ready to
Well, I
yield.
only want to say, Mr. Speaker, I do not accept the premise that anything in the bill we just passed with a majority vote, anything in this bill undermine either training, operations, acquisitions, period. I yield back.
With that, I yield back, Mr. Speaker.
Does the gentleman from Maryland seek recognition?
Mr. Speaker, the reason I rise is to ask for unanimous consent that when the House adjourns today, it adjourn to meet at Monday next, when it shall convene at noon for morning hour debate and 2 p.m. for legislative business.
Without objection, so ordered. The chair will now entertain requests for 1-minute speeches. For what purpose does the gentleman from Mississippi seek recognition?
Mr. Speaker, I ask unanimous consent to address the House for 1 minute and to revise and extend my remarks.
The gentleman is recognized for 1 minute.
On Sunday, Mississippi lost a talented young woman when she tragically died in an airplane accident. Lake Little had accomplished a great deal in her lifetime. She was an honored student, a skilled athlete, and a volunteer in her local community. Lake had a bright future. She held dreams of serving her country in the United States Air Force and had already enlisted in the Mississippi Air National Guard. Mississippi is proud of the life that Lake lived, and we are grateful for the positive impact she had in her community and on our state. Today, Lake's friends, family, and community have gathered to remember her and celebrate her life. Mr. Speaker, I would ask for a moment of silence on the House floor at this time as we join Lake's loved ones in honoring her memory. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I yield back.
The gentleman yields back. For what purpose does the gentleman from California seek recognition? Without objection, the gentleman is recognized for 1 minute.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I rise today to highlight the Trump administration's latest efforts to combat the skyrocketing